Hello, everyone. Alexandra and I are here today on my private coach, and we are going to cover post-COVID and the solutions in terms of your mental and physical health in dealing with the overload information today. So I will let Alexandra introduce herself, and then we'll introduce myself.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chelsea. So I'm Alexandra. I am currently a pre-med student at UCLA, but I just recently graduated from UCSD with psychology and global health majors. I am based in California, currently in Los Angeles, and I'm really passionate about psychology, and I'm really excited about the topic we're going to speak about today.
Thank you, Alexandra. I'm Chelsea. I am a life coach specialized in PTSD, and I guide women from PTSD to self-love. I previously have a bachelor's in politics and law, as well as a master's in communications, and worked at the United Nations Human Rights in Geneva. Alexandra and I are going to actually both talk about our experience in dealing with Corona, and I'll let Alexandra explain her experience, and then we'll go on to my experience.
Right. So actually, when the COVID-19 hit here in Los Angeles, or in California in general, I was actually based in San Diego finishing up my degree, and I remember the first time walking into what was going to be my last lecture, and there was no one inside. Later on, I checked my email, and my professors all let us know that there's going to be a huge switch in online learning and remote learning instead of physically being in class. And at first, I was very happy about this and kind of relieved because I thought I could just be in my bed and study. But, as the cases became more serious, we found, way more information about COVID-19 and how deadly it can be. I realized how devastating it is as a virus. And this created a lot of fear around me, my family, my friends. I decided to move from San Diego to Los Angeles to be with my sisters, to both get support and give support. And from there, I just focused on my studies. I completed all of my homework assignments, and I think that was the one thing that really helped me throughout COVID-19, and still does. My studies have always kind of been there for me. So yes, but in addition to that, I lost my grandmother back in March, and so it was hard to kind of deal with the grieving process while this pandemic was occurring. I lost my 2 jobs as a behavior technician and hostess, so for the first time I had to file for unemployment. But that being said, I found time to really dive into my own creativity, and I had the freedom to actually, focus more on my individual health, and, that goes for my physical health. So I started exercising more, I started sleeping more, and I also, really got into nutrition, making sure I've been eating the right things. And so that really helped me, as well as diving into a passion project of mine called Faces Behind Illness, where I talk about mental health and different mental illnesses. And in a way, it kind of destigmatizes it. And this is on Instagram. But it's been really helpful to kind of, focus more on what I can control than what I can't, and always believe and hope for a better future.
Thank you, Alexandra. And I think it's definitely really important to focus on what we can control rather than what we can't, for sure, because otherwise it creates more anxiety.
Yes.
And we don't want that.
Nope.
And basically, I was actually on a trip for 7 months around Asia, I was in India, and then Indonesia, Thailand, Indonesia, and then Vietnam. And in Indonesia, I started receiving messages from my family actually telling me to out of the country or of Asia in general. And at first, I kind of blew it off and thought it was just a flu, a little confusing because season. But then when I arrived in Vietnam, it started getting more serious, and I received about an email a day from my dad. And I thought, okay, my dad is a very rational person. How is he sending me all these panicked emails? And so then I thought, okay, I'm going to read up on this, which was a really bad idea in some ways. Mm-hmm. Journalists and their work, with all due respect to them, I know that in the beginning they work with the information they have, and so I knew that a lot of it, statistics could not possibly be accurate. So that led me to kind of, and I then came back to France, and it was sort of a similar experience to Alexandra, where I lost my grandmother, not due to COVID though, due to old age, and I also lost my English professor, who was like my mentor, due to COVID, and one of my cousins lost her grandfather due to COVID as well. And similarly to Alexandra as well, I started meditating and running more, and actually took the Values in Action test, which is a test I have my clients take. And what was really interesting is that gratitude showed up as my first quality, because I was literally kind of praying every single day and going through the list of the things or people that I was grateful for, because I think Corona that was one of the positive aspects for a lot of people. We realized what we had and who was important in our lives. And so now we're going to move on to the issues with COVID, which Alexandra is going to cover.
Yes. So while it's important to, stay informed about what's going on, and obviously there are many negative effects of COVID-19, I want to bring to light the positive effects as well, because there's always a balance, and it's important to realize that. I found an interesting article that Brian Nelson, he is a science journalist, he wrote. He actually found about 3 things, positive effects, that have occurred due to the change in human behavior with COVID-19. And they are that crime has fallen, skies are bluer, and other infectious diseases are fading from emergency departments. And so I kind of want to just talk about why these 3 positive things have occurred. Mainly because we're staying home. So actually not, driving our cars, not going outside, not exposing ourselves to other infectious diseases. In addition, because we're not going outside and using public transportation, the skies are becoming bluer. So that's kind of correlated with environmental health. And with the infectious diseases, the decline in them, that is mainly due to the fact that we're taking preventative measures seriously, and we're focusing more on personal hygiene and washing our hands. So, these things are great, and we should pay attention to these as well as time goes on.
And so Alexandra spoke about the positive effects of COVID, and I'll be covering the negative effects. And so Matthew Knock, who is a psychology professor at Harvard, said that due to COVID, there were more suicidal cases, quote unquote, in some ways. But that's actually related to isolation rather than Corona itself, because isolation is often a factor related to suicide. And then Dr. McKenna Jones, who is a psychiatrist in New York, actually said that for people who didn't have the skills to cope with this anxiety, we're left more vulnerable and out of control. And Dr. Owen Ruiz, who actually created Brooklyn Minds, which is an organization for people who are highly suicidal, said that on a very positive note, people actually managed to stay safe and cope with COVID for everyone's sake. So people kind of realized that there were less, like Alexandra mentioned, there were less people coming in hospitals and kind of creating space for people who needed the attention more immediately.
All right, so then we're going to move to the issues with COVID-19, mainly the uncertainty of it and, ways that it has affected all of us, and things to keep in mind while we move forward with it. So I'm going to be speaking about the news, which is very important and imperative, especially during this time. It obviously affects us all. We all watch it or reread it, or we listen to it. And I'm going to provide some tips to help with managing the news. So one of them is limiting exposure to news programs. An example of this is, let's say that you're watching the news daily. So you have it on while you're cooking, you have it on while you're taking a bath, etc. Finding a way to regulate your exposure to it instead of daily. Maybe it's every couple of days or, twice a week. That way it lessens your exposure to the news, because the news is mainly negative and, it's not bad information, but it includes robberies, burglaries, rises in COVID cases. These things aren't necessarily positive for our mental health. In addition, creating a balance between positive and negative news is also important. So if you read up on or watch some negative news, then it's important to also integrate positive news. An example of some positive news would be like learning different exercises, or learning different meal plans, or 5 steps to proper meditation or mindfulness, kind of integrating that balance. And then the third thing is read the news rather than watch it, because it's actually less stressful, and our stress response is so easily triggered. So when we're watching the news, a lot of the time it's as if we're experiencing what we're watching right here in our living room or in our rooms. And it's important to kind of de-escalate that response. So if you read it, it actually doesn't have a large effect on your brain as much, and it's less stressful. The last thing I'm going to talk about is just consume the news mindfully. And what I mean by this is just while you're reading the news, make sure that you know the sources, look into where your news is coming from, and make sure that you stay tuned with how it's affecting you. After you read, 5 minutes or watch 30 minutes of the news, make sure to, go inwards. Like, how am I feeling right now after I'm watching this or reading this? Am I really scared? Am I anxious? Is this good for my body? Listen to your body. So that's just staying mindful of yourself. And so that's for the news, but I also wanted to speak a little bit about stress, because I don't know how a lot of you have viewed stress, but for me, I've always viewed it as a negative thing and always something that I wanted to get rid of. And actually, there's a really interesting TED Talk that Kelly McGonigal, I want to say that that's how you say it, but she explains that the way that we interpret stress is actually what creates stress. So if we change our perception of it, then it changes our response to it. And I thought that this was really, really interesting, because it's just the statistics that she came up with were astronomically epic, if you want to call it that. But there was a 43% increase in the risk of dying when experiencing a lot of stress, but that's only if you viewed stress as negative. If you viewed stress as being positive, helping your body, then there was no risk of dying. So it's all about how you, kind of your perception of it. And while stress has been made to be the public health enemy, research suggests that stress may only be bad for you if you believe it to be the case. And I just want to end with a quote that she mentioned in her TED Talk, which states, "When you choose to view your stress response as helpful, you trigger the biology of courage." And I just want to highlight that her TED Talk is called "How to Make Stress Your Friend." And again, her name is Kelly McGonigal.
Thank you, Alexandra. And I actually watched it. It was quite fascinating. So I encourage everyone to go and have a look. And yeah, it's interesting how just the way we switch our thoughts and how we feel about something that we always thought was negative into something that is positive literally just changes our entire experience. So thank you for that. And we're now going to discuss the solution. So I'm going to be going over that. And then Alexandra and I are going to give you actually some grounding techniques and tools that you can use for your own anxiety. So the first three actually solutions that we have for you. The first one is human connection. So this was one of the major issues during Corona, and that's why a lot of people felt isolated and anxious, especially if you're a very extroverted person, then you're going to immediately feel lonely if you have to stay inside. And there's a really interesting study by Nick Epley, who is a psychology professor, and he basically did a test in a train wagon where he asked people whether they wanted to be alone or if they wanted to actually engage in conversation with people. And most people actually answered that they wanted to be left alone. But then they found out that if they actually engaged with other people, they felt like they had a better train ride, whether it was just a simple smile or a hello, it just made their experience better. And then there was something really interesting by Bootby and other researchers, which was going to a museum and having two people eat chocolate and knowing that they were both in the same museum made their experience of eating that chocolate and watching art actually more pleasurable. And so then the second point is mindfulness and meditation. And it's really interesting, having been a person that meditates every day, I knew that it had health benefits and mental benefits, but actually whole soul and all figured out that it increases your gray matter. They did a test over 8 weeks with people meditating 30 minutes a day. And it's just fascinating that it's able to do that, that our minds are able to do that. And then there's other researchers who found out that it actually shuts off your mind wandering. Alexandra and I were actually discussing this and how most of our thoughts are actually negative. I mean, it's a huge percentage. I think we have 70,000 thoughts a day or something, and 60,000 or something of them are actually negative thoughts. I need to check on that though. But yeah, it's quite interesting how meditation can actually shut that down and help you recenter. And then the third part is fitness. And we encourage all of you to actually go out there and do sports, because fitness can actually improve your cognitive abilities. So Hillman and all actually realized in a study that people who were highly athletic in school also had better grades. So your mind is more receptive to whatever you're learning because you have those endorphins and other chemicals that you've had thanks to that workout. And then the last one is by Bayback and all, where they did actually a really interesting study proving that physical fitness is really important for your mental health and not just physical health. So they took 156 people who were depressed, and after the experience of having them do exercise 30 minutes 3 times a week, 90% of those people actually recovered from depression. So exercise is really huge in being mentally sane. So yeah, exercise, guys.
Yeah.
And Alexandra and I are now going to go over the grounding exercise. So go ahead, Alex.
All right, so I'm going to discuss some exercises to monitor these thoughts that Chelsea was talking about, which are usually negative. One of them is the gremlin, which was created by Rick Carson in his book called Taming Your Gremlin. And basically how it works is you imagine this monster, this gremlin, and you give it a name, whatever you want to call this gremlin, and you put all these negative thoughts that you have into this gremlin, into this monster, and you tell it to go away, go in a corner. And this kind of separates your attachment to these negative thoughts. And it gives you control at the same time in this exercise to choose to remove yourself from them. And in addition to that, there's another exercise that's called the Think, Feel, Experience exercise. And this is created by Margaret Moore. And it's basically a recentering and breathing exercise where you ask yourself how you would like to think, how you would like to feel, and what you would like to experience in this moment rather than, feeling anxious, or whatever negative feeling you're feeling at that moment. And Chelsea actually said that she asked her clients to give her 3 adjectives, which they will use for how they want to think, how they want to feel, and how they want to experience the moment whenever this anxiety creeps in.
Yeah, and it's just very simple exercises, and it's fascinating how these can actually really make a difference in your daily life if you use them in those times where you feel anxious. So there's 2 more things that we're going to do and then finish up this conference. So one of them is actually something I also do with my clients, which is to explain very simply how your brain functions when you have anxiety. So the back of your brain is your amygdala, and that's the reptilian part of your brain. And that's where your fear is based. And the front of your brain is your prefrontal cortex. And this is where your logic center is. And so just doing an exercise of visualizing your negative thoughts going from the back of your brain to the front of your brain actually helps you kind of rationalize what's going on in your mind. Because when it's in the back of your brain, it's completely irrational. So you kind of ask yourself, okay, are my thoughts right now are about fear, or are they logical? And then that kind of, you have mastery over your own anxiety. So that's pretty useful, and you should try it at home and any of the exercises we mentioned here. And the last one is the yogic So any of you who have taken a yoga class, this is the you do, and sometimes it feels a little awkward. You're a bit like, okay, why am I doing this? But there's actually a real explanation as to why it feels so good, and that is that we have 12 nerves in our skull, and this exercise actually activates your vagus nerve, which is connected to your vertebrae and your lungs, so your respiratory system, and your heart. And it kind of just opens everything up. And when you do it, make sure you listen to those vibrations you have in your mind and just let it vibrate. So Alexandra and I are both going to do a demonstration. We're both going to inhale with you. So inhale, deep inhalation. And then we're going to open our mouth wide open and go, ah. So kind of go to the end of your breath there. And we all have different breaths, so it's totally fine if it's short or long or whatever. So thank you all for listening to this conference, and thank you to my private coach for realizing this conference. And Alexandra and I really deeply believe in mental health, and actually going to see specialists for your mental health, as it's probably the most important in your life in order for everything else to function. So whether it be a coach or a therapist or any other specialist, we really recommend going to see someone on a weekly basis or monthly basis, whatever you need. But especially in these times, post-corona, we all need to talk to someone about our anxieties. And if Alexandra wants to say something, go for it.
Yeah, I'll just pick up from there that it is very, very important that, and we realize how much our mentality affects our physicality. And if we're clear up here, then we're able to be clear in a lot of other ways in our life. And there's always help out there. And people, as much as, everyone needs help, a lot of people also love, helping others. So it's this reciprocation that's really, really vital. And as much as we feel alone at times, especially now, we're never alone. And we're all going through this. So it's important to realize that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alexandra.
Thank you, Chelsea.